Today on the Canon Journal podcast, I am joined by Dan Sanderson. We're very excited. He has released a new book called Reimagining Plato. And we're very interested in finding out how he has reimagined Plato and what the book is about and who he wrote it with and all this sort of thing. And we're very excited because his companion course to the book, Reimagining Plato, will be launching on the Cameron Journal Academy here shortly. It's still very much under construction, but construction is nearly complete, so we're very happy about that. And so we're going to hear all about that today. So welcome, Dan, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thanks, Cameron, for having me.
Yeah, well, why don't we begin from the beginning? Let you tell us about reimagining Plato and how you came to write this book and whatnot.
Well, as it turned out, I'd already done a project with Martine Diepenbrook. She's a relative new graduate or fellow as an ancient scholar, and we'd done a project together on Planck's. In fact, she studied, and I believe her thesis was on ancient cryptography, right? So the hidden messages and the ways that civilizations hid messages, either in mechanical means or in written script or and this type of thing, right? So I think the easiest way to understand that is that uh, if one warring party had to pass a message off to another party without it being uh, intercepted by people who could manipulate the information, then they didn't have certain things like encrypted um, technology over the internet. They had to rely on other ways to encrypt it. And it's quite fascinating how we've come up with various different ways to do that. So I actually had a project where I created some content with her. And out of all the philosophers, I mean, so much so that I call you know this also, Cameron, right? Like I'm a Platonist philosopher, and I got into philosophy, and the deeper I went into Plato, uh, the further and deeper he took me, and it still provides depths from which I thought this would be a great way to teach other people interested in Plato. And so that's how the idea came out, was to take my journey and share it with an audience, and hopefully people that are listening, that resonates because it's wondrous. It's wonderful.
Yes, well, what that would be a very oh, sneeze? No. Um why don't we talk a little bit more about that I guess journey into Plato? How did you get into that and start writing about it?
Well, I mean, I guess as the story goes, I don't have a an academic background or a post-secondary degree in philosophy at all. My education has been largely self-taught, 100% in philosophy and also in business. I'm an entrepreneur, and so I learn from my own edification. That's a big fancy word, right? But I remember it because um, when I was reading something, I thought, well, what does that mean? And of course, I would stop to look up words, and I would take learning into my own hands. And I think this was the beginning of what it meant to explore a text, right? So I can't say that I'm the most advanced thinker by any means. But I think that also means that I meet people and students where they're at. And and I think the depths of which, when I'm reviewing and teaching Plato, I think that's the opportunity. And and I think anybody who's saying, hey, you know what, I'd like to tap into this ancient wisdom as I did, will realize that. there's the top level cliche kind of things, but let's not kid ourselves. These texts are some of the most sacred texts and the most important texts of our collective canon, right? And it's extensive. It's extensive. There's 35 dialogues. Some of those are spurious, which just means that the authorship is uh, perhaps and most likely not Plato. But that would only account for 4 or 5 of those. 29 to 30 of the dialogues are very clearly written by Plato about his mentor Socrates. And his goal was to immortalize a new form of a hero. And this concept of hero worship was really interesting because back in ancient times, hero worship was pretty much orientated towards the heroes of Homer, the warrior class, right? Okay. And who do you direct that at? You direct it at the youths, the younger generation. This is the generation that's going to be inspired to greatness, to look at the obstacles in front of them and try and overcome those obstacles, right? Okay. So Plato's project on a larger scale was really to immortalize his hero and shift the culture from a worship of um, the older gods to some extent to
Hmm.
and and shift the people from hero worship of a warrior to somebody of an intellectual class, somebody who positioned reason above everything else, right? Okay. Now, that's that's very powerful. And it's not just Plato. It's in the academic world and of the Western tradition. This is very much identified and acknowledged as the foundation of Western thought, the foundation of a Western tradition, right? And and I have to agree because in that study of multiple years of studying, uh, reading classical literature, and reading a lot of philosophers, the to have a firm understanding of Plato is imperative. And I think that I know this course adds a greater depth and dimension to what to people's understanding of Plato.
Well, I want
Um,
to circle back to one idea you had mentioned, and that is the idea of writing it for young people and hero worship and all this type of thing. As I'm sure you're aware, it has become very popular these days on
mm,
social media to use the canon of Western civilization to do some, in my opinion, quite negative things to modern
mm,
young men and masculinity and all this sort of thing. And it sort of reinforces some very old ideas we have. Um, of racism and misogyny and this sort of thing. Why do you think those sorts of people are so attracted to philosophy and these sorts of writings and whatnot? And or do you think perhaps that was Plato's intention?
absolutely not. I mean, it's the ideal form of the good. This is the pinnacle of where his philosophy is orientated towards is by definition. And this is maybe one of the traps because the reason at that point is almost like they draw a line in the sand and they say by definition good is this, right? And you'll see those trappings in modern interpretations um, of religion too, right? I mean, uh, God is perfect, God is pure, God is this by definition, right? And so this is this is one of the failings or the limitations of a deductive model as opposed to something that's a more inductive, observational based approach, which I think really Aristotle kind of, started to that tradition thereafter. Now, help me with that word misogyny, because I'm just, sometimes if it's not fresh in my imagination, I'm not entirely sure what that's in reference to. Because I mean, I understand racism, right? And we'll talk
Yeah.
about that. But the misogyny, how would you describe that a little bit more, just so that I can make sure I answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it is so in manhood masculinity circles, red pill circles, all this type of thing. It has become quite fashionable to argue against modern feminism, rights for women. This extends to the abortion debate, especially in the United States, as we've had a recent change in that matter.
Mhm.
Um, it extends to even relationships, and this whole idea, the women have just gotten a little too uppity around here, so they say, and
Yeah.
we really should put them back in their place, pregnant and in the kitchen, sort of thing. Um, and too many times you have this sort of, I think it's this very interesting sort of recall to antiquity when times were better and men were men and stood astride the world like the Colossus at Rhodes, and women were away and in the kitchen having the children and all this sort of thing. Um and and the, the and it seems to become quite fashionable to use anything in the Western canon of art, of literature, of philosophy to reinforce these traditional ideas, as a counterbalance to more modern ideas on these subjects.
Mm. Well, equally, I think there's uh, ways to twist and reinterpret the past for exactly the opposite of what you're talking about. And I just mean, and how would I take you there, Cameron? I think that I would say that my love for ancient philosophy and literature and the classics, right? I mean, it's not just philosophy, and it's just not just the tradition that came out of ancient Greece. Um, I think you're a fellow literature lover, right? You really are. And I know you've got a strong love for literature, maybe not quite as deep, or maybe I'm not sure what you think about the classics. But I remember that when I one of my intellectual heroes was a fellow by the name of George Steiner. And I give you this 100%. He's uh, a hoity-toity academic, an elitist. He's got a. I imagine that if I met him in the street and I tried to talk to him about the classics, he would look down on me about with kind of ignorance. But he's definitely one of my intellectual heroes. I'm going to say, well, why is that? Why is he one of my intellectual heroes? And I think that the more books I attempt to read, the more authors I try to honestly become intimate with mentally, right? And some are very difficult to get into. Some are very difficult to try and find that undertow of almost anticipated relationship with the writer and the reader. This is a very unique relationship. And if you can have those, I think, and you're somebody that has studied a lot of literature. I think you, even if you remind the audience, myself, I think a double MBA or something in literature, right? So you have an
No, no, I
ability
just
to.
have a master's of fine arts in creative writing, that's all.
Oh, okay, all right. So the
Yeah.
so I create this illusion but
That's
basically,
one of my two graduate degrees. My other one is in diplomacy, which is an aspect of international relations. So,
right, right, right,
yes.
right. National relations and diplomacy. That's really interesting. So,
Yes. Well, yes,
what
yes,
I
I
would
studied terrorism, asymmetrical warfare, and all that sort of thing. So it was interesting.
asymmetrical warfare. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know what? That's funny. It's like I love the play on words. Like, if you say asymmetry, sounds symmetrical, but it isn't.
Yeah, well,
Just
I
like
mean, and that
this
also,
sort
I
of.
mean, yeah, that when you have two forces of differing compositions, two forces of similar compositions, like both uniform military. That's a symmetrical war. An asymmetrical war is when you have a uniform military against usually a non-uniform, somewhat organized insurgency. Hence the term.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess where I'm coming from is that,
And this
I
is why
mean,
my philosophy friends in college said political science was bad philosophy, by the way.
oh, probably there's not a huge
They made
depth
fun of this.
to
It's
it.
like they called political science philosophy done poorly. That was their view
Well,
of the political science department.
I have to also say that Plato, his greatest legacy, I personally think is the introspective part of his philosophy. I think that is by far more solid, right? And reliable than some of the blatant criticisms that you could attribute to Plato's philosophy. Okay, right? Like, I mean, The Republic is an amazing book, right? It's kind of like his magnum opus, but his ability to structure a society, um, it's it's very, very difficult. The introspective know yourself, thyself, feels much more powerful than the presumptuous nature of trying to structure others. And I think it plays out in his corpus where he realizes that the Republic just is not sufficient, right? And he gets invited to Cyprus, and he gets or Syracuse, and he gets to um, influence that government, and it ends in disaster. He ends up being put in chains, made a slave, makes his way back to Greece, and then it's in some respects it's a complete disaster. So going back to your point about misogyny and maybe I think I mean I can be a little bit forward with this, right? And let me try and see because I think you know, I don't know how comfortable you are if I bring in the concept or the person like Jordan Peterson, for example, uniting the youth to give male purpose again and have them stand up with their shoulders back and believe in God and go back into those traditional mindsets and return to when, like you said, men were men, right? This kind of thing. And we had purpose and we were no longer um, scared about the new female the feminism that seems to be surrounding us or gaining traction. And I think rather than make a carte blanche attack on that, I find that I can feel, and we'll call them memes, okay? I mean, I really, really do think this is a worthy conversation, is to look at something that is a dominant um, understanding, okay? Feminism, modern feminism is exactly that, okay? It's a Richard Dawkins would call it a mind virus. Now, yeah, that's hard. It puts a pejorative in it, and it automatically thinks virus. It's like a negative. That's not the case. It's just it has to do with the spreadability of it, right? And I think that these are progressive ideals that on their surface, on their face, would seem like great, amazing. Who wouldn't want women to be more liberated? Who wouldn't want to have um, uh, more gender fluidity? Now that might be, but hey, this is the idea about liberating people to make it a more inclusive and accepting society. Who wouldn't want that, right? Okay, right? That's kind of the idea. Um, and if the claim is that ancient traditions are being used to um, uh, destroy or counteract the momentum, I would say that's probably happening, right? But to the same extent, the ancient wisdom can also be used and leveraged in ways that move the progressive ideals in a direction of an ultimate good, right? Okay. Because again, it's a very deductive model. By definition, they're saying we're not, it's not, the society is not set up to make it um, uh, onerous or intentionally um, like prejudicial or just basically like I'm trying to think of the words like ignoble, right? Because they use this a lot, this idea of nobility, right?
Mm,
Okay. The what that wisdom teaches you is not to attack women. That's not what it's trying to teach you, right? And if it is, it's being co-opted for something of noble purposes or evil purposes, right? As the Christians kind of light up the world at about 600 AD, right?
mhm.
So I hope that makes sense, right? It's
Mm.
like because I think I understand where your audience comes from. And you and I are, quite often on a show with somebody who's we could say far right. I mean, how much further right does an ex-evangelical minister for the Worldwide Church of God get, right? Um,
True. Yeah.
but as it turns out, he's fairly relative.
And he's a
He,
Trump
he
supporter, enough said.
well, I mean, okay, let's talk about Trump just for a minute, if you don't mind.
Sure, sure. I just did the weekly news hour as of this recording because I recorded on a Monday. So I was just talking about that for an hour. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, I can only say how I've reacted, okay? And when Trump's first, um, I was down in Florida, okay? I was down in Tampa when Hillary Clinton lost and Donald Trump won, okay? And I was with some relatives and it was divided, right? It was really divided. I woke up and the law enforcement side of the in-laws woke up and said, "My man Trump won," right? And I was like, "Oh man," right? I was like, "This is ridiculous, right? This is just ridiculous. It's going to be a gong show." And in some respects, it really was those first 4 years, right? Okay. Um, and then, of course, we had the changing in the guard and it went back to Democrat. And then now we're back into I guess as Wade likes to call it, ditch to ditch. Like we're flipping from one, flipping to the other. And a couple things. I don't know if another 8 years of a progressive Democratic Party would actually get the Democrats or the supporters of the Democratic ideals where they want to go. And I think the majority of Americans are also feeling the same way. I think they went too far left and forgot to speak to the middle of the road people, right? And I think what's happened is that Trump was able to get some really key people on board, right? I mean, like them or love them, and it seems to be that's the way it is. Um, Elon Musk, for example, another fellow Platonist. Um, he's, by acknowledgement, he calls himself a Platonist. Um, JF, what is it, JF Kennedy Jr. or what's his
RFK.
name? RFK, yeah. Um, and like just the people that are surrounding Joe Rogan, right? Like I watched that interview with Trump and Rogan, and I got a lot of respect for Rogan. I got a lot of respect for Trump or for Musk. And I think that's swayed me. Now, Jordan Peterson was on, recently, and he's saying it feels like a hero's journey. It feels like they're rising to the occasion to do some serious work, to shake up the government and pull out the excess, the bureaucracy. Okay. Now, it's not an attack on the Democrats. It's I think governments get bulky. They get bulky. And when they're no longer in contact with the people, I mean, actually that's not what I should say. They get bulky and excessive. And I think there's a need to shake it up. And I think that this is the best um, administration to dramatically and visibly do that. Okay, that's what I think. Could this go completely off the rails? Could we absolutely be on a pathway to lose the democracy in the United States and the end of the free world? Possibly. But you know what? I see it equally as possible on the other side. I'm confused. I'm the philosopher. I'm confused, right?
I everybody everybody says exactly the same. I've had the last 3 weeks, I've had a parade of people telling me the same thing. I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. Like Trump, what is Trump's qualifications to do this? He's a reality TV show host. Let's not forget where
Right.
this man come from. His introduction to American politics was based in racism. It was the birtherism movement against Obama because there's no way in hell a brown man could have been born in the United States and somehow become president, which also invalidates the entire statehood of Hawaii. No one ever talked about that, but that just totally like Hawaii, that's not even a real place. A land that we annexed and deposed their monarch so that we could grow fruit. The United Fruit Company strikes again. A nasty case of settler colonialism. And now Native Hawaiians are struck with poverty rates worse than Native American Indian reservations, obesity, early death, diabetes, and so on. We've done great work. Um, let's remember that's how that man started. Let's also remember the media normalized him. In 2016,
Mhm.
$1 billion dollars of free media, $1 billion dollars of free media was given to Trump. Hillary Clinton could have spent her entire campaign budget on advertising and still wouldn't have caught up to Trump. If
Mhm.
they had done nothing else, stayed home, never had a rally, never had an event, never rented a plane, never did anything, just ran ads, they still would not have caught up to Trump. And
Mhm.
his first 4 years, people forget him making the military refuel at a airport in Scotland to keep that airport open for his golf course in Scotland.
Mhm.
We forget all the ways in which him and his children use that office to enrich themselves, which is expressly forbidden by the US Constitution, by the way. Nobody cares about that sort of thing. We forget the revolving carousel of clowns in and out of the White House and in and out of the administration because Trump, as I said at the news, I record this on the 25th of November, 2024. This will not air until January in 2025. But I was talking tonight how Trump likes that constant conflict between people, things, and ideas. He likes to have people competing and rubbing up against each other to see whoever leaves the cat fight a winner, and then that's what happens.
Mhm.
That's fine in a small family real estate office with one narcissist running the show.
Yeah, yeah,
When you're talking about a federal government with a
yeah.
budget of $6 trillion, with 2.5 million employees, the largest, well-funded, most powerful organization on the planet, that's deadly for
You know,
millions of people. And I
yeah.
don't think anyone realizes that the re-election of Donald Trump is going to kill people. The problem is that for a lot of his supporters, it'll be killing the right sort of people that they want to die. And that's every minority, every marginalized community, everybody who for about a decade finally kind of sort of started to have a voice in this country and kind of finally started saying, yeah, we deserve rights too, and yeah, we want opportunities too, and yeah, we want all of these things too. And those people
Cameron,
like
let me
me,
ask you.
got a little too popular. We got a little too powerful. We got a little too much of a voice. And this election, the strong hand of racism and misogyny came down hard on all of our heads because people were complaining the price of groceries was too high. And people were complaining that somehow the Biden administration had done everything. I mean, people say, "Oh, they left the working class." Kamala Harris was proposing a New Deal-esque package of policies expressly for the working class. This election was about inflation and identity politics, which especially with the trans issue thing kind of leading the way on that. That's what this election was about. And it ultimately was about minority and marginalized communities had gotten a little too uppity in this country. A little too much of a voice, a little too loud on social media. All of a sudden, nice, normal, kind, straight white people had to, be mindful of things they said and things they did and all this type of thing. And Trump came along and said, if you vote for me, I'll put things back to the way they were.
Mm.
And that's what people voted for. Let us not mistake what this election was actually about. It was undoing the last decade of social progress in this country. And I'm convinced at this point, there is no amount of working class left wing policy that Kamala Harris could have suggested that would have stopped that from happening.
Mm.
Kamala Harris could have said she was going to bring in communism. I mean, whatever have you. She, was going to lead the revolution. It would not have mattered. People want to go back to a country where the gays and the trans people are in the closet, the black people are seen but not heard, and preferably not even heard, and white people are in charge and at the top of the social hierarchy. I talked about this in 2017 actually 2015, when I wrote about the death of the white heteronormative male narrative and the rise of white racial consciousness. I saw
Yeah,
this one
but
come in a long time ago, and let's not forget that's what was really at stake here.
Cameron, I'm curious, okay? Because like it's intense, and you are obviously very charged. I think maybe because um because you're part of that minority, right? You've openly said on a couple of those. I mean, I don't need to highlight them unless you want to, but there's a couple of the highlighted minorities that you
Yeah.
identify with, right?
Yes, yes, yes. No,
Now,
I know when I'm being put out to pasture. It's not that's not,
no,
longtime
but
listeners of this show will know I have written openly about my own identities, all this type of thing, and I know when I'm being put the hell out. Like it's not a secret.
But when is it up to the government to do that, though? Right? When is it up to why is it up to the government to change social norms and re-engineer society? Like I think that in itself, like let's talk about that. Let's just give it a breath for a minute and say maybe this is not the policy for government. Maybe this is a part that it starts in the families. Like social change starts from within and radiates out from within, you know. Like, why is this thrown onto institutions to make that change? Why? Like,
I don't,
why?
well, because oftentimes these things and these ideas manifest themselves in government policy. I agree with you. Social change begins in social groups, in homes, in churches. That's why it takes so damn long. It doesn't happen
Hmm.
overnight. It takes a
Hmm.
very, very long time sometimes to get social change to happen. It comes through art, through media, through
Yeah.
progressive people putting things out, and it takes a long time. It does. And I tell people, especially my activists to my left in the progressive movement, who would like things to go a lot faster, I have to tell them social change doesn't happen that fast. I'm sorry. It never has in human history, and we're not going to be changing that here today. It does change a long time. However, here's the problem. These ideas on race, gender, sexuality, they manifest themselves as real government policies. It was not that long ago in the US military, we had don't ask, don't tell, where being outed or being openly gay was a cause for dishonorable discharge.
Mhm.
That wasn't that long ago. That was in my lifetime. I'm only 36 years old. Um, Jim Crow started out, you know how Jim Crow started? It started out in Louisiana when a train company restricted where black people could sit. And then it became the law of the land.
Mm.
Miscegenation, Loving v. Virginia. It was states had laws against interracial marriage. That's how we got Loving v. Virginia. Same thing on the gay side with sodomy laws. Some of those laws are still on the books. A couple in Texas was arrested in 2012 for having sex privately in their home because a woman saw it and they were prosecuted under Texas sodomy laws. These ideas about social people and all this sort of thing we can't just say, oh, keep the government out of it, because the government never stays out of it. I'll give you a classic one that a lot of people don't know. I had someone who did not understand this after World War II when all the GIs came back. We literally created a democratic socialist program for GIs that included housing loans, education. We couldn't throw enough money at those guys. Here's what they don't tell you. None of that was available to black soldiers coming back from the war. They'd fought in the same war. They'd survived the
Hmm.
same stuff, done great service, all this type of thing. Not a single one of those programs was available to them. Not one. And even if they had wanted to buy a home, they would have been stuck in red line neighborhoods nationwide because the FHA had decided what groups of people should live somewhere, with whites being at the top and black people being at the bottom, with Jews, Italians, and Asians kind of spread in between, sort of thing. And it was
Hmm.
not until the 70s when we got fair housing in the back of that finally got broken. These things seem innocuous, like, oh, society will progress and change. Yeah, it may be. It may do so, and it oftentimes does. But here's the problem. There's a lot of laws and policies and things that affect people's lives, the ability to get jobs, make long-term generational wealth, all this type of thing that
Yeah,
get
right. Who's
passed
the?
in the meantime. So in social
Mhm.
change at some point, you're going to confront the policies in society that do or do not allow people to live in your society. And that's why, although social change doesn't start at the government, it's the government soon becomes a part of it.
Who? What countries in the world are the most progressive in the world?
I mean, that would be depend on what metrics and how you rank them. Because
Hmm.
most countries are a mixed bag, you know. I mean, we can extol the virtues of Scandinavian democratic socialism on the
Hmm.
one hand,
Hmm.
but they were a little behind on LGBT rights, sort of thing. We can talk about some of the economic progressivism in the Middle East, but they're very socially conservative.
Well,
Um,
why don't we look at the why don't we look at the and I'm kind of why don't we look at the more um, higher performing GDP countries, right? The wealthiest nations in the
that'd
world.
be anybody
Which
in the OECD. Yeah.
okay, so where would the United States rank in terms of like progressive ideals?
I mean, I think that depends on the idea, you know. I mean, for example, in healthcare, we're dead last because we don't have universal healthcare sort of thing,
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
something like that. But and then a little bit higher up the food chain, you have like Canada, which has access to care but doesn't pay for medications, and that can get expensive and all this sort
But
of
let's
thing. But
focus
then
on
you
the
have the
idea.
UK that has the National Health Service, so like even within that, there's kind of us at the bottom, Canada's middle class, and the UK, it has kind of the standard of what universal healthcare looks like.
No, but what I'm saying is what about the most important um, progressive ideals that affect you, for example. Okay, so I mean, I don't want to mention anything about sexual orientation or anything, but I mean, obviously you're a black man, partially black, or
Yeah.
of a black origin, right? Okay, so is that right? How to say that? But anyways, is that correct? Right? You identify
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah. Yeah,
African
yeah.
American, right? Heritage, right? So which countries in the in those the what did you call it? The G7?
I know the OECD.
Oh, the OECD. Okay, which
Yeah.
which countries would have the most progressive places to live for African Americans or people of mixed race?
I mean, there's kind of virtues for all involved. That is an area where the US would excel because we've had decades of work to get there. I mean, it's not all clouds and rain here. That's where the US would do quite high. Our racial system is kind of weird compared to our peer nations. So it's hard to compare that's a bit of an apple to oranges comparison. Um, but I could say the United States does fairly well, but then you also look at someplace like Australia or New
Hmm.
Zealand and how they
Hmm.
deal with their indigenous populations, kind of the black people that's where their racial issues come out, where you mean that Australia had the Flora and Fauna Act, which had Aboriginal people classified as animals until the 1970s. So in that way,
Hmm.
the US is better. We moved faster than Australia on that. Yay for us, sort of thing. You look at the history of slavery. Britain got rid of slavery 20 years before the United States, and we had to have a war to do it, sort of thing. So I mean, everywhere you go, you're going to find different countries doing better in different areas than not. I'm not saying the United States is entirely behind, even on something like race. We've come a long way. My
And
father was born in 1947, the son of sharecroppers in Alabama. You don't get
hmm,
any deeper in the South than Tuscaloosa. I mean, and he grew up in a world where everything was white and colored. He grew up in a world where George Wallace, the governor, stood on the steps of the University of Alabama and said, segregation, now segregation forever. He was alive, stood there, saw it, heard it.
hmm,
My father's in his 70s. We've, from that moment when he was 18 years old, when George Wallace gave that speech, to now is night and day. The
hmm,
way we live in this country today is very different than the world my father grew up in. And so
hmm,
I'm not
hmm.
saying we have not made progress, because I'm always the first one to say we've made a lot of progress. Let's remember that. We have made a lot of progress. My concern is that over the last decade, what we have tried to do in this country is we have tried to undo the more subtle parts of racism. We have tried to undo the systemic issues within racism that leave certain groups out of wealth generation opportunities, out of economic opportunities, all this type of thing. And that has really been repudiated by Trump voters. DEI has become a slur. It's literally the new N word. For saying, oh, we should have diversity, equity, and inclusion. People actually don't really want that. It's kind of one of those like, oh, well, if you can make it and hack it, then that's okay. Not realizing there can be someone who's very talented may have a bunch of barriers to even get to the point where they can even start to compete that other people don't have. That's what those policies were trying to undo and all this sort of thing. And so these sort of subtle, quiet ways these things manifest was the point of all of that. And it has been soundly rejected. Simple as. It's been soundly rejected. And the reality is we're now moving into a government that will gut every department and things trying to do that. Corporate America can't close DEI programs fast enough, all this sort of thing. And so rather than trying to lower barriers for success to people to give genuine talent wherever it comes from a chance to go really far, we're now
Hmm.
basically, I wouldn't say we're putting up barriers, we're just choosing not to take down those barriers or even focus on it at all. As I said in my video I recorded earlier, I was talking about this very subject on Twitter, and someone said, yeah, identity politics, I really hope we're over all of that. Because the reality, and this especially was true in 2020, as people started to learn what the real history of race was in this country, or why we had Stonewall riots about LGBTQIA issues and all this type of thing, people got really uncomfortable, especially if you're white, got really uncomfortable, be kind of like, yeah, this is the society that you and we all have been living in, and you have quietly been allowed to advance, to do things, whatever have you, not realizing that behind you, underneath you, were millions of talented people who never got that chance. And that was not a fun conversation for a lot of people to have. And it started to filter into the workplace with, hiring different people, college admissions, affirmative action, all these types of things. And people were just kind of like, not they don't necessarily want to roll it back. They just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to deal with it. They want to live in an imaginative world where anybody can be anything and do anything, not being mindful that
Cameron,
that isn't really true and has never been true.
Cameron, look, I mean, if we take it a step back, right, and we
Yeah.
really just look at the two of us, okay, I'm going to say that, whether the audience knows it or not, we've had an uphill struggle. I'm in a similar situation as an author with a media outlet, just like you.
Mhm.
And I don't think anybody is slamming you because of your orientation or the color of your skin, possibly. Okay. I mean, I'm in the same situation. There's nothing, I'm not accelerating because I'm a white male. Like,
It's not accelerate
I
that
mean,
no
what
that,
we
that's
just, I don't,
that's a
just my,
classic thing. It's not
no, no, no,
acceleration, it's just fewer barriers.
no,
It helps whether you know
no,
it or
but what
not.
I'm saying, if we took your brain and you put it into my body and I went into your body, I'm saying we're almost at the same level, doing the same thing, working just as hard, getting absolutely nowhere, spinning our wheels, right? Like if we're really honest and having an honest conversation, it's not like I'm moving faster in the world because of the color of my skin, right? Nobody's giving me anything and nobody's giving you anything, right? Is that not correct?
Well, yes and no. I mean, in this particular bubble of content creatorship and all this type of thing. Yes, certainly. I mean,
And
but
can
I
wouldn't it be more productive if we just focused on what we could do? Like, what, and maybe what we could do together. Wouldn't we be a better example for us to just do something together with an obvious visible minority, right? And I think that's kind of the spirit of what I'm trying to do, and probably the spirit of what I think the best of what Plato has to offer here is for us to really dig into ourselves and figure out how can we bring the best of what we have to offer, right? Together, maybe working together to bring the best out and then be able to move up on the merits of our own work and our own, right? So that
well, I mean, yeah, I mean,
we're not
yes,
blaming
in an
society.
open
We're not blaming society. We're just like, okay, we're
in an open in an
you live in
open
America, one
competitive
of the
and in an open competitive field such as, content creatorship and all this sort of thing. Yes, that is certainly true. That's not the bubble that most people live in. Most people are trying to get an education, get a job, buy a house, try to do a little bit better than their parents did for their kids and all this type of thing. And the reality is if you have brown skin in this country, that road is a lot harder to hoe than if you have whiter skin, a whiter sounding name. Hell, there's one, your house in this country will be evaluated at a higher valuation if the appraiser thinks white people are living there. It manifests itself in the most stupid, dumb ways, but it's there. And here's the problem and the kind of frustration I get into is in communities of color, this isn't even an argument. We just are like, yeah, that's how the way things are, sort of thing, all this sort of thing. It's people who've never ever seen it that are absolutely dumbfounded by it. It's like I remember the first time I got pulled over by a cop with my ex-girlfriend who's white in the car. And I handled it in the normal way that I do to try to live through the situation, especially given what's happened in the last several years. And we leave this interaction, and she's like, I've never seen that side of you before. I've never been scared to be around a cop before, but your whole everything changed. And I said, yeah, because I'm brown in this country. I'm black in this country. Interacting with a cop for me can be deadly. Like my life expectancy getting shorter by the second. So the longer the interaction goes on, my life expectancy is getting shorter and shorter. And so, yeah, there's a very specific set of things I have to do and motions I have to go through in the hope, not the guarantee, the hope that I might live through that situation. And
yeah.
it literally, she had never realized, as liberal and amazing and progressive and is totally left leaning because she comes from fifth generations of Democrats, as she is, it wasn't until she was with me and lived it
Yeah.
that she started to understand. Almost as funny as when her mom dropped an N-bomb at a family dinner one time, which was hilarious. And she didn't even notice it until I brought it up. Again, again, sort of thing. Like it's that's the stuff that always kind of blows my mind. And I think what's funny is over the last couple years, we finally started to have that conversation in this country. And now the general attitude is, yeah, we don't want to think about that. That's unpleasant. It makes us uncomfortable, makes us look bad, all this type of thing. We don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like the big lesson out of this election is that we spent a lot of time trying to have this conversation and people are just kind of like, no, thank you.
Okay. So now we got to deal with it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
in some respect,
yes,
right? I
absolutely,
mean,
absolutely.
you know, Monday morning is a new work week, and for those of us that have to do that, and you and I still tasked to do that. We still have in America, Canada for me, we still have, jobs to do and food to put
No,
on the table, and
this
I
is
still,
yes. No, we do have to learn how to live with this situation, of course. And we will, sort of
right.
thing. For me, the only reason I kind of bring it up is for me at a personal level,
Hmm.
it hurts because I felt like for the first time we were making real progress forward, we were actually going to take the time to undo a lot of the barriers that leave people behind. And I feel like the downside of what has happened is that we're going to lose a lot of that progress. We're going to barely cling to the progress we made, and we're not going to be making any new progress for a very long time. That for me is where it hurts a little. I'm not going to lie. Like it really hurts, and it also, and I wonder, what my future will be, and all this sort of thing, and what opportunities I will or will not have access to, and all this sort of thing. One wonders. You know, it's a very it's a very tough thing. It's a very tough thing.
I understand. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I realize Canada's lucky that the situation is a bit different, but my guess is, given Canada's history with its residential school system and how it's dealt with the Native American population, there's some parallels there that I am not quite educated enough to draw on at this moment. But many, much pain and suffering of people, and people marginalized and left behind by society, and progress is trying to unfix and undo that, and realize that everyone that lives in your country is valuable and deserves a chance and an opportunity. And unfortunately, the road to fixing that is an uncomfortable one if you're of the dominant group, and it involves having very uncomfortable conversations and all this type of thing. And I think the problem is twofold. The GOP will never have that conversation in this country, and the Democrats now won't, because it's an electoral loser, which means it could be 10, 20, 30 years before we finally get back to a place where we can start to have that conversation again, and we'll have lost 30 years of progress.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, I think that the bigger, more visible sort of reality is going to be economic, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
if but I mean economic across the board. So one thing I'm disappointed with, I'm an advocate of the environment, right? But
Mhm.
I'm and Trump's idea, like we're opening up the oil, like just there we go. But it hasn't been immediately apparent to me that the progressive, the national progressive and domestic policies and the international policies, um, I just, it's not apparent at all that they're working. They seem to be backfiring. And now the thing is that if it ultimately is extreme austerity, which is the policy,
Yeah.
then it may be working, right? But like I want to share something with you. I think one of the things is that I um an uncle of mine called me an iconoclast, right? Like like to break down things. I do really like to look at that different, odd sort of perspective, maybe too much to a flaw, right? Okay.
Mm.
And so I don't, and I brought up this idea of memes before, and I don't like to fall into the same echo that's going on and that you could hear, 10 other people say, right? I try to think, okay, well, what is there an aspect of this, even a nuance of it that I'm not quite understanding, right? Okay. Right. And I think, me bringing up, for example, um, the relative prosperity in relation to other prosperous countries. He's like, oh, actually, and you're like, yeah, maybe. It had you think a little bit, right? And I hope that that actually fills you with a little bit of like, oh, humility, or with, oh, I never quite really thought of it that way, right? And so I think that, I mean, I by default know that I kind of go down these different paths. So let me share one idea that I have is that I am passionate and care about the environment. I look at what the scientists are showing us, and I think unequivocally we have a serious problem. Okay. Now we've talked about this before, and you're on the progressive side. You're like, I don't buy it, right? Okay. I'm entitled to that opinion. I think it's an enormous issue. But what I've come to realize, okay, is that I don't think that we're in the point in human history where we're ready for what Bertrand Russell wanted was like a universal government. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that when resource shortages happen, when tipping points, if they happen rather immediately or any time in the short to medium term future, and resource capacity or infrastructure starts to fall over, I really do not think, I don't think that I don't think we have the strength of legislation and universal bonds, okay, that we're going to bring everybody along. And what I mean is there's going to be enormous winners and enormous losers in this calculus. And I, for one, as a Canadian, am thankful that my family is in Canada and we live beside the biggest and greatest country that, in my opinion, has ever been on this planet, which is the United States of America. I'm thankful for that. I wouldn't want to live in Iran. I wouldn't want to live in the Middle East. And so, for those ideals, I think to myself, there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. And I don't mean losers like this isn't to put somebody down. I'm just saying, I don't think we have within our capacity as a world structure to pull it off, right? And so I'm actually coming at this from a more practical standpoint. I'm coming at it from a practical standpoint to say it makes sense to have a strong America, right? I mean, I remember Peter Zeihan. You've talked to him. You've helped me through some of his because you've got some expertise in his definite bias towards population, like demographic emphasis, right?
Yes,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
I have that insight, and then everything revolves around that circle, right? And I
Right.
get it. I was like, wow, that's very insightful. Thank you, and it's kind of tempered my understanding of his advice. But you'd mentioned something that the American debt could get to over $100 trillion, and it still would not falter from being, number one, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I think we should do that. I mean, and I'm saying, okay, I'm kind of like an honorary American. I'm like, rank it up. Go in, let's stabilize the world as much as we can, become a bigger economic and dominant military force, expand the military complex, and make it so that things are stronger. Now you're like, what is wrong with this guy? He's a freaking nutball. He's a nationalist. Um, he's for the military complex. Like, what are you talking about? But I see, to me, I see what's coming. I see
There are also people who think we
the
should just annex you, so there's that.
Well, I mean, on the thing, I mean, like, I'm not gonna. I saw this one thing that had the Canadian, and it was like, we'll give Canada. It was like the meme was like fair trade, right? I not.
Yeah,
It is a fair exchange if we do this, and so it had the boundaries of Canada go down to Washington and wrap around California and back up to Canada, right? So that was what
yeah,
we got. And basically what's behind that is because you can have all the woke freaking nonsense people, right?
right,
I'm just saying that's what was behind the meme, right? Is like you can
right,
have
right, right, yeah,
those,
yeah,
and then we'll go in and carve out Alberta, right? Because that's where all the
yes,
oil is,
right,
right? So
yes.
so when it comes to like building and survival,
Will anyone miss
and
Saskatchewan? Like,
no, but what I'm saying is that when it comes to having the strongest, like, do I want to be one of the outlying warring tribes, or do I want to be a citizen of Rome? Right? I want to be a
yeah.
citizen of Rome, and I want my descendants to be a citizen of Rome. I want to be part of a world where America is strong, right? Right? I really do, and I think the time for that is now. We gotta be. Should be on the radar.
I mean,
I'm just
yes,
saying,
but I
right?
also have to say, but I then I would also have to look at that and say, at what expense?
That's a really important question.
And for
It
people
it
that
it,
care,
it
and for
really
people
is.
that care about climate, you just had an administration who passed the most aggressive climate legislation in American history. You just had an administration
Right.
that took climate very seriously. And I guarantee you, day one, Trump leaves the Paris Accords, and day two, they're going to undo everything they did in climate, and it's going to be drill, baby, drill. And they're not going to
Yeah.
encourage Brazil to stop chopping down the Amazon rainforest. And no one's going to ask China or India to stop building coal plants or come up with another different solution for them or anything like that. The Trump administration won't lift a finger to do
Yeah.
anything about that. And I say that as someone who's not on board with the climate agenda and who kind of thinks climate change is silly because I actually read reports and speak to scientists, sort of thing. I mean, but I even get people, that's the thing, the policy they want people to pursue. You just had 4 years of administration who took it seriously. You're now going to have 4, 8, or more years of an administration who will not care. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, let's expand the country. Let's, do all these things, let's, really kind of let it rip. And I have to say, at what expense? How many geopolitical problems are you going to create with that? How many other knock-on effects are you going to create by doing that? And honestly, how much human suffering in the second and third world are you going to cause with that? I mean, yeah, it's probably great for us here in North America. If you're Mexico, Canada, the United States, maybe even parts of Central America, all this type of thing. Yeah, it might be great for you, but that sort of thing also comes at a lot of expense at pretty much the rest of the planet. And I
And there's
think,
going to
and
be
I'm
winners.
sorry, call me weird. I think that's worth thinking about and talking
Yeah.
about as responsible global citizens.
Yeah. It was funny because but there we're back to this idea of a global citizen, like we have some sort of global coalition of governance. And
Yeah.
quite honestly, we just don't have that. I mean, bring Wade into the
We have a
conversation now at this
handful of
point. Is that
institutions that are paper tigers. Yeah.
we may eventually get that point, but I think we are too nationalist by just observation,
Yeah.
just by the way things are. And I think I remember something from Brett Weinstein one time talking about this, that if if you take, and he's a progressive, right? If you take where you're at right now, okay, just assess the way the reality is, right? The way reality is. Stop, just observe, right? Rather than and then strategically try and say, as a society, what and where do we want to go? What do we want to focus on? What should the government focus on? Right? But take real account of where we're at and what's reality, and then figure out how you want to go. Okay? Now, maybe there's a role for the government in, progressive ideals and to help them marginalized, but maybe it's not to be published. Maybe it's not maybe it's not to um, make it the I guess like the doctrine. That's wrong. That's not fair. To make it the issue, right? Americans are the conservatives really love this. It'd be like, okay, so are you saying handouts? I'm like, yeah, maybe that's just the way it should be, right? Like the people are visible minorities, or maybe you just give them handouts. Yeah, the Ameri the African Americans, and like, subsidize, just pay for it. Apparently, on
Well,
the
yes,
left,
we
you can just
tried
do
that
that.
and
You
then we
just
did
print.
welfare reform and got rid of it. So there
You
was the
just
end of that.
No, but you just print money, right? Isn't that how it works with modern monetary theory? I hang out with a bunch of leftists and institutionalists with
Although the
my
pandemic would say that MMT is kind of dead because you can spend too much money and cause inflation. We've
no, but
found out how to do it with the pandemic.
it's always been maintained that you can print more money, right? But inflation is the big problem. You can't. And so, and it was really interesting because I had asked Steve Keen, I said, well, okay, so what would the damage be if somebody gave him $1 million and he did more research? What He was like, nothing, zero. So I was like, wow, we have within our capability to help people who are marginalized, and he's marginalized. I mean, he's a white male, but he's still on the fringe of all of the academic circles, right? Okay, so if you have a voice, you have that educational background, you have something that's we're saying, why can't you subsidize somebody like that? As I asked him under MMT, what issue would that cause? And he was like, zero. So in theory, we could.
I mean, it depends on how broad-based you get. The inflation out of the pandemic was caused by too much money, too much demand chasing too little supply. It's one of the Jerome Powell said this in 2021, and he said the Fed was going to have a very hard time controlling inflation because there was too much money
Well,
chasing too few goods.
Cameron,
You know.
my,
So Steve
if
Keen's right. He's right in that an injection of money that way would not cause that problem. But if you multiply that outward to too many people,
are you
you
talking
then
about
will get
supply of
inflation
money
with
or
too much
demand of
money
money?
chasing too few goods.
Well, and that's where, like, do some investigation on him. He's saying those supply demand curves are a load of rubbish, right? They're it's like, and so he would say that you're falling into a neoclassical trap of this, state of equilibrium between this ideal state of equilibrium between supply and demand. And when it comes to um, currency in the market. He's saying basically the whole entire discipline of neoclassical economics needs to be thrown out the window. And I'm sitting there and I listen to you and I'm like, okay, I get the assessment. And in fact, one time you published something on Planck's Hip and Steve rips in and goes, "What are you publishing this crap for?" I mean, not crap, but neoclassical sort of thing. It was nothing to do about your writing thing. It was basically like, I mean, I'm sitting there in a closed circle with that group going, okay, I understand it. You're institutionalist, you're post-Keynesian, right? Okay. And basically he wants to throw out all of the neoclassicals. I understand that.
Yeah.
And there's really important key concepts like supply demand curves that just don't play out and don't make sense because he says, we know better, right?
Even
We
but here's
understand
but
that.
even returning to your main point, supposing MMT is correct, which I think it is to a point, um, there's no way in hell American voters are going to be kind of like, well, I guess the only thing to do with black people is just to sort of pay them to hopefully keep them quiet about all this identity politics stuff. Good luck.
No, 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 but here's the thing, right? Like, I mean, I understand what is the fastest delivery mechanism in order to give people uh equal opportunity, right? So, you have somebody who's like on welfare and he's a construction guy and he has got skills. He can swing a hammer and has some skills of construction. Doesn't matter, black, white, purple, green, or whatever color you want to paint him. He has, or she, or somewhere in between, says, I want to be on a construction site. Okay. And it's like, all I need is a pair of work boots with steel toes. What does welfare do? They go, "Where's your boots with the steel toes? There you go. Go and work." So I think, in summary, what you're talking about is like, that's fine for the white male, but for the female, should be laughed off the job site. And for the transgender person, they're going to not hire him or her or it or whatever, right?
Right.
They're not going to do that. Okay. So then it kind of goes up, it escalates even more, and then the government's okay, now what are we going to do? It's like, okay, so we're sitting there, we're in the government, we're like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to force or legislate the construction companies to hire uh, people of gender fluidity or people of mixed race or females? How are we going to do that?
Oh, we do what we did in the 70s. We put in affirmative action and equal
No,
opportunity
no,
laws.
but the
Been there, done
point,
that.
but what my point is I'm saying, okay. And then the construction companies come back and they go, all right, I understand all that, but they can't, there's nobody to hire, number one. Number two, they're not qualified. They don't know how to fucking swing a hammer. They grab the hammer and they say, is this a left-handed hammer or a right-handed hammer?
Well, no,
And so the
the
absurdity
whole
of it
point,
is like the law is just there.
right? But here's the thing: is in all of those
Are they qualified?
in the existing affirmative action equal opportunity laws, the first impetus is between two equally qualified candidates. The idea is that when you have two equally qualified candidates, it is better, it is preferred in your hiring to choose a minority candidate who's similarly qualified. Those laws were never meant to hire unqualified people. So if I have Carpenter A and
Yeah, yeah,
Carpenter
yeah. Hmm.
B, and Carpenter A is white and Carpenter B is black, in AAEE, the idea is that I'm supposed to hire Carpenter B because there is many more opportunities for Carpenter A than there is for Carpenter B.
Hmm.
And that's one of the fallacies when you get into these conversations, even with DEI. The point of DEI was not to stuff companies and government full of people who are not qualified. The point was to reduce the barriers so that a trans person who might face a lot of barriers getting into a career would have fewer, or a black person, or a woman, or whatever have you. That was the point. It's not to lower standards, it's to lower barriers to entry.
I got it. Yeah, yeah.
And that is unfortunate. But here's the problem to this discussion, Dan, is there's a lot of, I'll call it malinformation because it's bad information, a lot of malinformation about this stuff, fueled by social media, anecdotal experiences, all this type of thing, of people being like, well, they're just not hiring white men right now. No, our job market is really bad right now. They're not hiring a whole lot of anybody these days. So we're gonna, and there's a lot of stuff that, and you have a lot of influencer accounts on Twitter, X, all this type of thing that are being like, this is the downfall of the country because rather than just hiring the best person, we're being forced to hire, these people who are not where it's like you're not even giving these people a chance. If they meet your requirements, how do you know? How do you know that someone's not actually going to be able to do that?
You know what is funny though, because I don't know if there's always equal people. Like, I mean, how would I put it? Like, I think what you're saying is actually quite noble to have that. Like, if it really comes down that the HR person and management's looking to hire A, B, C, D people, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it may be like something like a John Rawls sort of thing. It's like, okay, well, let's take them and go one, two, three, four, and they're all equal, and let's randomly draw them out, or let's, to give them an equal chance so that we don't bias we don't bias to the white guy, right?
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that I honestly like the hiring process. Rarely do they sit there and go, all these people are equal. All these people have equal background, equal education, equal, right? And so it goes to your point, it's even deeper than that. It's more systemic. People hire on education. They hire on experience.
They
I get
also hire
hired
on
based on my
culture fit, which knocks us
kind of
autistics
that's been
out. Like,
changing, right?
yeah,
But that has
yeah.
been changing. They want to balance out the office and everything like that. Now, I get that. But what I'm saying is that like if you really, really want to change it, doesn't it have to happen that the young African American I mean, because it could be focused on black, it could be like, multiple visible minorities. They have to work on building their experience base and their education, right? Isn't that like the root cause of it, right? That should be
Not
where it is. And of course,
necessarily. Not necessarily. For example, if you don't come from a family that can afford for you to not work for 6 months to take an internship, there are some fields that are basically closed off to you.
well, I
Finance,
I can't. I never could,
medicine,
and nobody in my
law.
family, Cameron,
And
nobody.
but this is and this is where, as I say in my essay on racism, you can't have this conversation without very soon talking about class. And this is probably where you and I will come back together because it is a class issue when you start talking about social mobility, because it is,
Right.
you're absolutely right. If, and I've written about this extensively, if you are from a poor white working class background, you also can't afford to take on a 6 month unpaid internship.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
this is where especially in America, this is where race and class come crashing into each other.
Mhm.
Is that a lot of the barriers that are faced by minorities, regardless of their background or economic privilege, are also faced by lower and working class members of even the most dominant racial group. So
Hmm.
the point of getting rid of unpaid internships was not just to help brown people who can't afford it. It was also to help the aspirationally social mobile people of the working class. And one of the things in my next book that's coming out, America's Lost Generation, I have stories from real people that I got on Reddit who came from working class background or an immigrant background, were aspirational and watched their whole lives fall apart because of a lot of these barriers. There's a story in there of a woman who was wanted to be a lawyer, and because her family didn't have the resources to really make that happen for her, ended up back working at Starbucks because even despite going to law school and taking on all of the debt, and even going to the trouble of passing the bar, she couldn't get a job because she hadn't interned at a law firm that would get her a job, and no one was hiring for entry level lawyers. It's one of the reasons I actually didn't go to law school because I was going to go to law school to do international law. It's one of the reasons I didn't go to law school. And here's the stupid part: I come from an economic background where I could have 110% gotten something like that afforded to me, and didn't go that direction because there was no entry level jobs. For her, she had the double whammy of not being able to get that internship and there also not being entry level jobs, which meant she went to college, she went to law school, piled up all the debt, and ended up back working at Starbucks as if she hadn't bothered to go.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is where, and this, and on top of that, she's from from a Hispanic immigrant background. So yes, this is where race and class crash back into each other in terms of barriers. But this is also why reducing the unnecessary barriers and focusing on standards and not unnecessary barriers is so important because good talent gets left behind.
There you
Silly
go. Good talent.
barriers
Yeah.
like an unpaid internship or low paid residence for doctors, all this type of thing. People get left behind, and oftentimes good, talented people never get into those fields because there's this silly barrier. So, yeah, we should outlaw unpaid internships. We really should. It's free labor, basically, all this sort of thing. Yeah, we should encourage companies to hire more entry level jobs. We probably should subsidize that sort of thing,
You know,
and that would benefit
Mhm.
everyone, especially if you're socially mobile.
Yeah, I think that there's a way to do it that is much faster. I want to give you an anecdote. Sorry, it does sometimes it goes in favor of what you're saying, and other times it doesn't. This one unfortunately doesn't. So I have a good friend in on the Pacific coast of Canada that's a home builder. He was a Polish immigrant that came over from Poland.
Hmm.
That's by definition.
That's where they come from.
And he came over and he built his factory and he's amassed about $10 million in equity, right? Building and on and on. He's a brilliant, brilliant man. He's has an ability to do not just one trade but all of them and exceptionally well and engineering and it's just I call him a Renaissance guy. Like he's really good. He's a little far right, but it's okay. But anyways, I like that perspective, right? I mean, I do. I like being able to, to have friends on both sides of the aisle. So, anyways, I was helping him with his project, and he's building these factory-built homes, right? As you know, it's a issue of housing crisis in many countries, including Canada and the United States. And is it a manufacturing crisis? I don't know. Is it a way to get more control into the government hands? Okay, well, this would probably be, maybe what the far right is saying. Okay, the far left is saying, hey, we're trying our best to, help with programs and stuff like that. And so, in the United States and Canada, there's, in particular, the province I live, which is British Columbia, there's something called BC Housing. And I remember some of the programs that are out there for these builders to be able to receive subsidies or grants through this government organization are, um, I guess they're quite intensive for trying to apply for them. So you take somebody who's typically a builder and they know builder things and go, okay, well, what do I need to do to apply for this, for this grant to get some financial help so that we can get and produce more product out into the marketplace, right?
Right.
And as it turns out, there's a ranking system. And it's like, well, are you hiring indigenous people? Do you have a DEI program? Do you, right? And so there's all this. things that are showing up as political that are part of the conditions for releasing the money. Now,
Right.
before we just go back, rewind the tape. Anybody listening, rewind it and go to. It's not supposed to be intended for anything else other than when you have equal qualifications, who gets the work, right?
Right.
And what this guy is saying, these guys are saying, or he's saying, is like, I, I don't if somebody, I have a lack of people applying. I don't have qualified labor. If I had qualified labor and the guy was purple from Venus, I'd hire him or her or it or whatever. It was like a ball of energy, I'd hire it. But I don't, and there is nobody. So I've got a negative check mark, and I'm never going to be selected because I don't have an Indigenous program, and I don't have a DEI program, and I don't all this political stuff, which has nothing to do with building a house, zero to do with building a house, zero,
Yes.
and it's forced down the throat of this one particular builder. I told you, I warned you it was an anecdote,
No,
and it
no,
is.
no. And this, no,
And
this is
it's like, what
exactly
the
no, and
what?
it is, and here's the sad, unfortunate part. And I'm very sympathetic to our Mr. Builder. Um, Unfortunately, it is anecdotes like these that usually hit social media the fastest, that then becomes the face of a lot of these programs. Now, I happen to have to agree with him in terms of I definitely know that there was some leftist parliamentarian in Ottawa who decided that we wanted this subsidy money to go to certain groups and we should pile all these requirements on top of it. I know exactly the politics behind how that went down. I get it, sort of thing. And yes, and these are the type of anecdotes that really bring a black mark onto a lot of these programs. When the reality is, if you want to cause more housing to be built, you should be shoveling out the dollars to anybody who can put four walls and a roof together, to code and and build housing as fast as possible, regardless of who they are. The counter argument to that would be that um, if you don't put those things in there, then minority owned businesses usually never get to that money and it's taken over by people who have, who have the connections and the resources and the people to go and do all of that, which is why they do that. I think the better policy is probably somewhere between those things, in terms of just because he doesn't have a DEI program or is not hiring Indigenous shouldn't be a mark against him. But if you do have those things, it could be more marks for you, which would kind of even
No, but
things
I think
out a
that's the
little
still,
bit.
but still, they have a limit on who they're going to give it to, and when it
Right.
comes down to
There's
them
only so much money
looking
that can go to so many people, right?
right, right, and I
Yeah.
just, I just think there's a better.
But then that also returns to the question of, okay, how are you going to try to use this stuff to provide an opportunity to builders from diverse backgrounds? And usually the answer is we don't care. Or it's too
Or
much
there's
work to
none
try
out
to figure
there.
out how to do it, so we're just not going to bother.
I don't know. I think that money can go into bank accounts really fast. Right? So show no,
Certainly,
like no,
certainly.
but look, but think about this, right? Okay. So let's say, for example, me and you, right? Okay. And we're sit there and we go, um, or you apply to the government, you say, I'm a struggling media outlet. I really would like to have a staff of 35 and an operating budget of whatever so that I can at least somehow compete in the media landscape, right? Okay, right? That's what you would really like. That's what you want. Okay. All I need is a chance. What's the fastest way to do that? The fastest way to do that is to literally put the money in the account because you know how to spend it, right? Is that not right?
Well, I guess with you're also trusting someone a great deal, and we saw how that went with the PPP loan program. I mean,
Well,
we kind of did this
but
during the pandemic with the payroll protection program, is we literally just tried shoveling money into bank accounts, and a lot of people, quite frankly, got rich off the largesse simply because they had the ability to quickly access the banks, quickly access the funds, and quickly spend it. And I'm talking people like Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tom Brady got a PPP loan for his restaurant in Texas that he didn't need and had to return the money because it looked bad. I mean, we
Mhm.
kind of did that over the pandemic. Let's just shovel money into the accounts of people who know how to do stuff and see what happens. And it turned out to be a huge grift of a lot of people who didn't need the money. And you know who lost out on that oftentimes were minority owned businesses who didn't have the banking relationships to go through the application process to get a hold of the money,
Mm.
sort of thing. And so
Well,
it's
I'm saying the application process is onerous, and I'm saying it should be
right.
simple. It should be easy. If you have a bank account and a registered corporation, and you say that you should be able to just ask for it.
Yes, I mean, yes, I agree. Unfortunately, very rarely is it necessarily that simple, and maybe it should be. But then you also have people who will say, "How are we going to oversee how this money is spent to make
That's
sure
the
it's spent
problem
properly?"
because the government has this
These are the
apparatus of
discussions. This is the problem.
that's right. As soon as it gets into government, then it needs oversight and it needs a level of scrutiny is that doesn't happen in the marketplace. So, for example, if you make it on your own, do you have to answer that at all? No, you earned it. It's your money. You answer to nobody. You don't do that because it's not public money, but it is public money, really, if you think about it,
No, it's the money of your customers anyway.
right? So, I'm
It
just
also relies on education, roads, first responder services, all this, the society that allows your business to grow. People kind of forget that you need that to have a successful business. Yeah,
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 right.
I mean, it is. And Obama got a lot of flack when he said you didn't build that, and people thought that was very offensive. And he didn't say it well, which is rare for him. But what he really meant is that in order for you to have your successful thing, there's a whole layer of society that's financed by public taxpayer dollars that allows your is the foundation on which your business can grow. Having employees that are reasonably educated, having, fire and ambulance on hand, sewer, water, all of these things. Without these things, your business could never open its doors.
Hmm.
And so, in order for us all to be successful, there's a certain base layer of stuff we all have to pay for so that we can live in a society that has businesses, that can pay people, that has disposable income, so that we can have a modern economy.
Yeah.
And it's even banking regulations. It's insured deposits so that when banks go under, people aren't wiped out. It's
Hmm.
it's financial regulations to make sure that your money is safe in the marketplace. It makes sure that you're safe from scams, and that when scams happen, it's enforcement of contracts, which is the most fundamental job of government. It's all of those things, and if we do not decide as a collective to pay for those things to exist, so that we can have a functioning society, it all falls
Falls
apart
apart. Yeah, yeah,
very
yeah. Agreed.
fast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree.
Go to
I agree.
Somalia, go to Haiti, go to Lebanon, go to Sudan. They'll tell you all about it. Um,
Yeah.
and you that's why I laugh when people say our country's collapsing. I'm like, oh my sweet summer child, not even close. We're not even in the same city as collapse. Like when you go to countries that truly have collapsed societies, the human suffering is absolutely unreal. We're not
Yeah.
even in the neighborhood of that.
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
Haitians would love to live like our homeless do. For
Yeah.
Haitian people, homeless in America would be an upgrade.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of thing. For people in Sudan that are seeing their children taken away for child soldiers and their daughters raped and murdered, sometimes not always in that order, and all this sort of thing, homeless in America would be an upgrade. They would beg on our highways. They would be safer than where
Hmm.
they're living,
Yeah.
sort of thing. And so the reality is that in order for us to all be successful, we have to have a functioning society. And my great fear, laying aside all of my concerns about marginalized communities, my great fear is that in the great effort to cut government programs and cut unnecessary bureaucracy and all this type of thing, is we're going to start to undermine the very thing under which our fabulously functioning society is based. And it's once you undo it, it's very hard to get it back Ask Greece. Their
Yeah.
whole country was bought and sold by foreign investors to deal with their debt crisis.
Yeah.
And while their country has not collapsed, not by far, of all the countries in the EU, the Greeks actually work the most, which is funny because everyone thinks they're lazy and retire too early and all this type of thing. They actually work longer hours than anyone in any other country in Europe, average of 47. They're practically American with how many hours they work, all this sort of thing. They all their public goods and investments have been sold off and sold away, and now life is very expensive. And they're stuck with the currency they can't devalue. Um, and so it's a very and that's what's coming. The austerity that has ruined the UK and has basically collapsed the United Kingdom. That they are headed to very dark times ahead. That's what's coming on
Mm.
January 20th at 12:01 p.m. And if we look at the UK as a map of what's going to happen in this country, they only have 68 million people. Take every problem they have, make it three times worse.
Wow.
Homelessness, housing, health, you name it, take every problem, make it three times worse because we have three times the population. It's going to be devastating. And
Mm.
we have very, very hard, tough times ahead when you bring in that type of austerity and that type of let's just cut everything for the sake of cutting stuff because government's just too big and it's just doing too much and all this type of thing. And the reality is people like Elon Musk and others get fabulously wealthy. They
Hmm.
make out like bandits. They always do. They make out like bandits because they're the ones that have the money to buy up all the stuff that the government's going to be selling off and getting rid of, like the weather service.
Yeah, but it's not only that. There's BlackRock and all sorts of companies that are buying up neighborhoods and rental units and
Oh yes, and we just have a BlackRock person in Trump's. I mean, Trump's cabinet is littered with BlackRock people. And Vivek Ramaswamy was a venture capitalist. All this type of thing. They are going to buy what they're basically going to divest the government from stuff so that private equity and wealthy people can buy it up. And that means life for everybody in this country gets exponentially more expensive. Then you pile on tariffs on all goods coming in, which Trump just said we're going to have tariffs on anything coming from Canada and Mexico until they fix their quote unquote border policy and all this type of thing. The price of
Mhm.
a new car in this country is going to skyrocket because guess what Canada makes a lot of? Auto parts.
Yeah,
Good luck getting a cheap part for anything in this country because we're going to put a 20% tariff on it.
yeah.
Wood, timber. You think housing is expensive to build now? Wait until we're charging Canada 20%. We're paying 20% tax on stuff brought from Canada. Lumber is going to go up, which means for a lot of builders, they'll go under because they can't afford to build houses because they can't afford wood because
Yeah.
incidentally, you guys have more forests than we do, and we buy a lot of wood from you. So all this sort of thing. I mean, it's going. I mean, this is the stuff that never like that. It just starts to exponentially go and go and go and grow and grow and grow, and all of a sudden, life becomes untenable.
Mm. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, it's conversations like this, I guess, that, are going to save us, I suppose. I mean, we have to figure out what we're going to do next week. And, thank God we don't live in Sudan or, right?
Yeah. No, no,
So
absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, thank God every day we don't live in all this
I'm
type of
really
shit.
looking forward to kind of this new leaf of us working together. And I'm going to have an added presence on the Cameron Journal, right? And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
looking,
we're going to be getting new articles from Dan here soon, which is going to be really exciting. And we're probably going to be doing more conversations like this, which will be really cool, especially in support of the course, Reimagining Plato, which is going to be really awesome. I have been looking at some of the notes as I've had to copy and paste them into our course platform and some of the quizzes and all this type of thing. And so it's going to be really, really good. And this is, obviously, this is the conversation we love to have at the Cameron Journal. This is the conversation you like to participate in. So it's a match made in heaven in that way. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe it's something we're offline, but I'll just say it now. I'm moving the course transcripts or the transcripts for the videos and the quizzes and the quiz answers and the related bibliography for each section into a published book. So the document that you have is going to be updated in the coming days. So don't waste too much time in that document because I'm doing a revision as we speak.
no, that's exciting. Well, the reality is people will have a chance to have this course available to them super very soon. So make sure to uh, if you have not joined the Cameron Journal, cameronjournal.com, a pop-up of sign up is there. Make sure to sign up. And look for announcements because we'll do a whole big announcement on it and all this type of thing, and it'll be really exciting. And this is, the great thing about these sorts of courses and the course communities that we're building and all this type of thing is that we can have these important discussions. Because as you can tell from this episode, which is one of my longer ones, we're at an hour and 40 minutes. When you're talking about philosophy, it doesn't take very long before you start talking about other things that are happening in the world, current events, all this type of thing. And then all of a sudden, we're
Yeah.
unpacking, we're deconstructing all this type of thing. And one of the great things about this course is that's the community we're trying to build, is people who want to come in around Plato and use it as a springboard to have important and vital conversations. And I think that's really exciting. So, and I
Yeah.
think people will find it exciting. So,
Yeah.
but well, Dan, why don't you remind everybody where we can find you online and keep up with you as we go and grow with the Cameron Journal?
Well, first and foremost, I hope that people will see and it very easily accessible on the Cameron Journal to sign up, right? I
Yes.
really want to support Cameron on that. But as I mentioned, I also have a media outlet called Planksip, and I think it's for somebody that um, is looking for a journal, a media outlet that is more specific to philosophy. Okay, now I'm planning to work with Cameron to build out and take a lead or a leadership role in a philosophy section on the Cameron Journal. And I think it's going to be stronger together. So I'm really going to be putting a lot of emphasis and focus on what goes into the Cameron Journal. And I want to try and encourage people to find those course signups
Yep.
on and through the Cameron Journal. Now, alternatively, there is on planksip.org, that's plank, Plank, like a piece of wood, and sip, like a hot cup of coffee, planksip.org. That is the media outlet that I am the owner of, and I'd love to have you there. And the value is apparent. Go there, check us out. We'd love to have you.
Yes, and people should check out my exclusive series I'm working on right now about conspiracy theories and fake news. So,
Yeah,
which I'm is a series I'm doing exclusively for Playing Sip, which is a lot of fun. I just put out the second one, which is really great. So it's two of a series of probably 10 or 11. So it's gonna be great. So
yeah, yeah.
all right, Dan. Well, thank you so much for coming on by, and we'll see you next time, all right?
All right. Talk to you later.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at cameronjournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.